Greetings, everyone. From Fremont County, Iowa. I'm Chris Teachout, fifth generational farmer, and I just wanted to share with you today my journey in cover crops and all my experimentations. So this is where I'm from, clear down in the southwestern corner of Fremont County, Iowa. And kind of the history of my change, in 1979, I started my farming career. 1982, we were doing helicopter applied cereal rye and corn. In 91, we began to no-till corn and soybean residue. 1994, began to no-till soybeans. Then in 2012, the light bulb moment kind of went off on cover crops. I went to some of these cover crop meetings, and they were talking about cereal rye and all that, and it's like we had been doing that clear back in the mid 80s. So, I jumped on full board and trying to just advance all the different things that I can do in covers. So in 2014, covers on most acres. And as of now, my brain is still stretching. This is kind of a very thing that I'm very concerned about. It's a representation here. It's a rest stop along Interstate 80 eastbound going to Des Moines. And it's a Wallace Foundation and based. And so all on the inside, it tells about how we, all the conservation efforts, waterways, filters, contour farming, no-till. But what's concerning to me is outside of this is these soil represents these soil columns. And the first one is the year 1850, and it showed we had 14 inches of topsoil. And as we progress down through time, the last one is the year 2000, and it only shows about 5 inches of topsoil. So this is what my concern is. We aren't rebuilding, we aren't regrading the soil. Then I kind of charted this out, and if you kind of extrapolate this on out, it's kind of like where we're headed with this natural resource that we've been endowed with, and what we're supposed to be caretakers of the soil. So that's kind of my background, my underlying, cause. So it started out, when I jumped into it, planting into rye, moderate high rye. We were planting into a green, or else a totally desiccated brown rye. And so we started out, and I think this is, planting soybeans into this. It was very easy transition, an easy way to get started. I think a person will have a lot of success doing this. And this is kind of the results that we had, the soybeans covering up the ground. Our water infiltration picked up. Our water that did run off was a nice clear water instead of losing all the chocolate milk going off the field with all our nutrients in our topsoil. Plus, it saves the moisture, and it also keeps the temperature down. We had a check strip on this field where we had some bare ground showing, and in the late June, it showed a surface temperature of 148 degrees. Where we did not have the covers. So those are just some of the things with covers. Then we're always doing testing, and here we're planting into bigger rye, which that's what I'm trying to maximize my carbon input when we're planting soybeans into a big rye like this. In the background, you can see some strips. Those are some spring-seeded multi-species mix. And so we're always doing strip trials and trying to get some data and figure some of these things out. And yeah, here's another view, when you're going into the big rye. And I guess Iowa was known for one of its rye whiskeys. And so one of the things when you first attempt to do one of this and plant into the big rye, I would suggest taking a little shot of that Templeton rye before you start out. But anyway, here's what I'm really love about the big rye. We get a big carbon mat, protecting that soil. The soybeans come up through that. So this is what I'm trying to maximize my carbon input, going in with the soybeans. And then basically, I want to talk to you about my adventure into interplanting. And anyway, this was an old drill, 170 years ago. They were doing it with a single horse down the wide rows, 40-some-inch rows, and they were interseeding. And this is, over 100 years ago, they were doing this, so it is nothing new. And so when I first started out, I always tell guys, what do you have? What do you have that, you can try to make this work? So the first year, I just took my M with a little whirligig on the back and went out there and tried different mixes and trying different species. And when I did it, I was doing a little late. As you saw, the corn was V6 going to V7, which was kind of too late of a start. But at least it gave me some experience here. This was some buckwheat and some clover, and we did have some establishment there. And this is on a corn field. And if you notice my residue, it's really being consumed up. We have a high activity of the biology and the earthworms. And if you look closely, you can see some earthworm castings there. But anyway, what happened with this broadcast on there, moderate stand, it got established, but then we shaded out because we were planting too late at the V6. And so, like I say, we were trying different species mixes and trying to see what would work. And this was broadcast on top, and we had some flax, we had some cowpeas. The cowpeas were the biggest thing that really came through on this. So this was kind of about 4 years ago, some of our first experience with the interseeding. And then this is what some of it ended up, some of those first years. We had some pretty good above ground biomass and just trying to figure this thing out. When we looked at the biomass, we did harvest some of that and measure the above ground nitrogen. And even broadcast cowpeas here, we were getting about 20 pounds of nitrogen, above ground nitrogen. We did not measure below ground, but we had a lot of nodulating going on in those cowpeas. And so we're trying to feed the biology. We have a high carbon crop, the corn crop, so we're trying to grow some nitrogen and to feed the biology to help break this and to cycle our nutrients. This is kind of what it looks like at harvest. The cowpeas, they're a warm season legume, so first frost, they'll desiccate and be done. But if you're a grazer, this kind of opens up some opportunities, to have a mix like this going in when you have the corn stalks and the cowpeas there after harvest. One of the things we're always trying to collect some data, and this is comparing on the right the 30-inch with covers, and on the left is the 30-inch with no covers. And these were data loggers that I buried about 4 inches deep, starting about 1st of June. And if you look where there's no covers between the row, we have a wide fluctuation of temperatures, highs and lows, throughout this time period. When we have the covers in there, it moderates that temperature, both the lows and the highs. So it kind of helps regulate that soil temperature, helps regulate the biology, the activity going on there. Then another thing, what I wanted to see with the interplanting and doing the warm season legumes, I wanted to see how far can we push this? Can we adjust our nitrogen rates? So I did an extreme plot on this where we did a very low rate, only about 40 pounds of nitrogen, but we interplanted warm season legumes in this strip trial. And so we did individual species. On half of it, we did also had a mix in there of some cool season species. We started out, we had mung beans, we had guar, we had iron and clay cowpeas, we had sun hemp, we had pigeon pea. And this here is a chart of the results of that. Like I say, only using 40 units of nitrogen. And the caveat of this, I wouldn't suggest going out there and reducing your nitrogen rate way down at the get-go. This field has been in a cover crop system for quite a number of years. We built the biology up, and we can start to see some of this activity in the fields. And so we're starting to get the soil back alive to where we can jump in and do this. The red line on the chart represents my 10-year average, 187 bushel yield on corn. And the green bars represent each individual warm season legume, plus it also had the mix of some cool season mix in there, some brassicas, some radish, some rape. And with only 40 units of nitrogen, it was showing that we had quite a number of those that were above average, above my 10-year average. And then the gold bars represent just the individual warm season legumes by themselves. So the one thing we noticed with the cool season in our southern Iowa, our corn gets so very tall that the cool season plants, we'd always get them started. They'd get up to about 8 to 10 inches, but then after that, they'd die off. But with this, just as doing this test, we kind of showed that they did do some benefit, showing the green bars comparing that had that multi-species mix in it compared to the individual species on the gold bars. Then here's what some of the results are and what we're looking at to really cover up our ground here and to feed the biology. This is what we're looking for here. And here it just shows, trying the different species, harvestability, through these is no problem. And we're also, on the right, we kind of show kind of like the three sisters approach like the Indians did. We have the corn, we have the cowpeas, and we also have some squash in there too. And when I started testing and found out that the warm season legumes were the kind of the ticket to look into, I looked at the different cowpeas. We evaluated about 50 different varieties, a lot of the old heirloom ones, some that are readily available commercially. And so we were doing a lot of testing on there, and here's just some strip trials. And when you first look at this photo, it's like, oh my gosh, what a mess. It looks like a bunch of vining morning glory that, the combine head's going to be just a big dump rig. But anyway, what these are right here is a strip. These are black seeded cowpea, and they'll vine all the way to the top. Now, and in my talks, I tell people not to do this, but I've had people come up to me and says, well, if they're doing a grazing corn, cowpeas, a black seeded one would really work in this system. Another gentleman came up, he says, well, he'd always like to chop silage, and they always get to him a little late. So this would, keep the protein up and add a little more bulk to his silage yield. Then, like I say, right next to it, we had the black seeded ones that are clear of the top vine, but down below is the one I really like is the iron and clay. They stay more prostrate to the ground. The black seeded ones climb clear of the top. We also tested red rippers cowpea, and they are very early maturing, and they would set seed when these others are a little longer season, which they stay vegetative, which means they'll stay they'll nodulate longer. But the red rippers would set some seed, and then sometimes if I raise some non-GMO clear highland soybeans, you would have some red volunteers coming up in that next crop. But that's just a no-go, having red berries in some in the tofu market. So here's kind of what we're looking at. These are kind of the iron and clay. They stay pretty prostrate. A few vines going up. And this is what it looks like at harvest. And just a nice coverage. This is 30-inch rows. And you get a few vines going up. And like I say, harvestability is no problem at all. Very tender vines, and never had any pushing issue on this. And that's kind of what it looks like at harvest in some of our strip trials here, showing the green strips down through there. And many years ago, I used to be a cow-calf operator, and I wish I would have had something like this, back then to turn the cows out onto. So then that kind of leads us into some more experimentation. Bob Recker of Cedar Valley, he had been working with a lot of row spacings and the outside row effect. So we're trying to look at how efficient we are at harvesting sunlight. And so then we kind of went and did some extreme testing. Since we're on 30-inch rows, let's open up that gap and go to 60-inch rows and see what happens here. So here's a view of where we did a large scale test plot where we did 60s. We did 60s with covers and without, and also 30-inch rows with and without. And we did 4 replications of each and randomized and if you look at this, when we started and what we planted into, this was some of that very heavy carbon crop of leftover from previous year's soybeans that were planted into big rye. So if you look at the ground right now, it's got a full coverage. We've got our inner plant seeded into there. And how I seeded this was just have an old planter that's offset hitched, so I can plant about 8 inches off the row. And so that's what we're seeing here. We've got a mix of cowpeas in there and a little bit of sun hemp and a little bit of mung bean. So like I say, remember this picture here, the amount of coverage that we have on there, we're fully covered up. But then as we progress through, as the corn grows, even in this picture, you start to see there's not as much residue left there. We've got a lot of biological activity going on here. The earthworms are just grazing that. So I've got a lot of grazing livestock here eating up my residue. So we also had in there a little bit of cool season mix. There's a little, I think a little bit of oat there coming. There's a little flax there. But some of those and some of the rape, some of those get up there, like I say, they'll get up 8-10 inches, and then they just they shade out where we're at here. But as you can see, the residue is starting to be consumed up as we go along. Just another shot of, we did this in a couple of locations down on the bottom and then also on some of our rolling hills. But it just shows the cowpeas, and the cowpeas really love the understory. But when you look at this picture too, and remember that first shot, here, look at our residue. It looks like it's, only about half the residue. And a lot of this, it's kind of clumped together. A lot of the earthworms have dragged this together and made a lot of their little huts, little castles, I call them. And they're consuming this and they're pulling it down into their burrows and stuff. And so organic matter incorporation. So it just continues to, and that's why doing this interplant, we need something to cover up, since the earthworms and everything's kind of grazing all that cover. Then here's what, the 60-inch rows, and we get a big bunch of biomass and some healthy corn through there. And I noticed when we went to the 60-inch rows, we kept the population the same, about 33,000 as compared to the 30-inch rows. So our in-row spacing was really tight. And we saw the corn was visibly shorter in the 60-inch rows. And the leaves stayed a lot healthier, longer in the season. And then here was the trial, and comparing all those replications. The 30N would be a 30-inch with no covers, and 30C would be the 30 with covers, the 60C with covers, and the 60N. So this plot, each strip, covered, almost an acre and a half. And so we got over 3 soil types. We got some good data here. I think it's some good, honest, and randomized, replicated data. And here are some of the results that we got from Bob Recker and stuff. When we're comparing, the 30-inch to 30-inch with covers, there's no statistical difference. The same way with the 60-inch compared to the 30s with and without. There's no really statistical difference. But when we added the 30-inch or the 60-inch with the covers, then we kind of dropped about 6%, and so we're growing a bigger biomass there, but we're giving up a little bit of yield, but not as much as we thought. And so it shows that, we are harvesting sunlight. Maybe 60 inches is a little too wide. Maybe going back to that old corn seeder, the rows were 40 inch. So harvesting the sunlight, that's what we're trying to do. Trying to grow a biomass cross in between there to where we can grow some own nitrogen. And then here is what the example of the biomass of the 30-inch rows with the covers. And this is the biomass here, and we've probably got about 20. This is on 1 square foot. We've probably got about 15 to 20 pounds of nitrogen grown above ground with this biomass, and that's in the 30-inch rows. In comparison, here's what 1 square foot of the biomass in the 60-inch rows, how much we're growing, and we're from 70 to 90 pounds of nitrogen above ground biomass here. And just amazing what we can grow in there. So future ideas on this, if a guy was corn on corn and was raising this legume in there, and if you're raising 90 pounds of nitrogen and doing 60-inch corn, maybe we could offset back and forth on that 60-inch row pattern where it lines up with this legume to capture that and do a kind of in-field rotation, every year on that. So just some other possibilities of what we could do.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Yes, you in the wider rows, the 60-inch rows, did you have the same corn population there, or was it different?
Yeah, the population was the same. Okay. Like say the 30-inch rows, 33,000, and the 60-inch was 33,000. So basically, in row population, we're pushing those 60-inch rows tighter together, and so that's one thing maybe we need to look at too. Can we space them out more? We've kind of been satisfied, I guess, on 30-inch rows. I've always done a lot of kernel counting of the years, and we're kind of satisfied with that 750 kernels per ear. And when you get that one little skipped, or you have a lot more potential per corn stalk, I've seen up to 1,000 kernels per year. So on the 60, can we maybe get a little double ear, or can we lower that in row population on this? So some more investigation on trying to balance this, getting that wider spacing to grow this biomass in there, grow some nitrogen, and to feed our biology.
Right. Thank you, Chris.
You bet. And then, this is at harvest, what it looks like in between there, going right down through these 60s. Yeah, this is kind of what the combine is looking at. There's a sun hemp out there. There's the cowpeas and some mung bean shooting up there. Like I say, the 60-inch rows, and it looks like this would be a real pain, but it goes just right through there, no problem. And this is what it looks like at harvest. Like I say, I wish I had some cows back on it to turn some of these, some of this, just cycling the nutrients even faster than what I'm doing here. But here, I'm getting a real good carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you understand how things break down, whether it be composting or the nutrient cycling in the soil, you have to have a proper nitrogen and carbon ratio. And since we have these corn stalks, which are very high carbon, and everybody's complaining about how the breakdown of it, as you saw, I don't have the issues with a high biology soil of breaking down residue. I've got to feed the soil more and have more residue out there, more carbon crops on there, but also have the carbon in there to keep this cycling going on. So why am I doing some of this? Basically, it's to do this. It's to rebuild my soil, to aggregate it, create more infiltration. And basically, I'm feeding the biology of the soil. So I used to be a livestock producer, for most of my life up until the early 2000s. But this, I've got a lot of livestock underground that I've got to take care of, and to make our soils better, to regrade our soils. And so I do a lot of microscope work, and we do the soil pits and looking for the carbon streaking with our earthworms and allowing the roots to go down deeper, and just with the microscope work, kind of seeing what kind of biology that I do have out there. And underground, I have a lot of earthworms. The earthworms have really just, you give them a nice home and that thatch over the top. They're grazing a lot of it, but they're really helping build my soil, not only vertically up, but also downwardly with some of the carbon streaking. Then here on my farm, this is a shot of some of my livestock. And here we've got a lot of the bacteria. We've got the protozoa going on. And we also have some arthropods, microscopic arthropods going on. And these are some shredders and stuff, and just going up the soil food web as we go along. We also have beneficial nematodes in there. So with all these, this is what is coming together here. This is a slake test. Look it up if you haven't. Ray Archuleta does a great demonstration of this if you haven't ever seen this. But this is on my farm, my field day. On the right is a field that I've farmed that is a custom farm, and it's been no-tilled for over 20 years, but it doesn't have the biology going on it. It hasn't had cover crops on it. Mine on the left is where I've been doing these practices for a number of years. All that biology and all the roots and the cycling that I've got going in there, the biology is helping glue that soil together. So when we put that soil pad in there, it stays stable. We aren't losing that either to groundwater or to surface runoff. And so we're starting to build, and I can start to see my organic matters, really increasing, and just getting very stable soils out there and healthier soils, so we can, eventually start, reducing the nutrients a lot more. But rebuilding our soils is what my big caveat is. So thank you. So, have any questions?
Hey, Chris, some guys who use cover crops, they have questions about how do I measure my nitrogen output, my nitrogen fixation, what can I credit? When you were doing your comparisons with different cover crop species, what methods do you use to find out the nitrogen payback? Just typical soil tests, or how do you do that?
We're still trying to, fine tune that. A lot of times, the spring nitrate test, it seems like it's not dialed in enough for some of the things we're doing. So that's why we're testing mainly with yield there. The below ground measuring of the nitrogen, when you have that growing crop and when it releases, is a little harder to figure out. So right now it's going to be an observation, and the science is starting to catch up with some of the things what we're seeing. And that's what I kind of get some of these things out there. And observation is my first big tool and doing some of these smaller tests, then expand the tests and see what works on your farm before you go whole hog on it and to make some drastic changes. And so one of the tools I use is the Haney test, the Haney soil test. And that's kind of where we did that. When we saw on these real healthy soils that we worked the most on, it was saying we could reduce our nitrogen way down. And I haven't been, gone full bore on that, but I've done it on the test. But overall, on my overall operation, I'm slowly starting to, bring some of the nitrogen rates down. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. What advantages, you've got cowpeas, mung beans, sun hemp, different species that you don't see on every no-till farm. What advantages are you seeing to having those in the mix rather than just doing something easy like cereal rye?
Yeah, like I say, when I went down this journey, we tried, probably 20 different species out there, different mixes on different chemical regimes. That's another thing, just finding out what works with your chemicals. And these worked for us down here. I have friends up north in northern Iowa that, some of the cool season mix, the annual ryegrass and some of the brassicas and rape and radish, some of those work very well up there. Their corn does not get as tall as ours do down here. And doing the cereal rye at that time, yeah, we'd get some oats or some cereal rye to grow, but it would shade out and it would get up, 6, 8, sometimes 10 inches tall. Then it would just fade away. And one time I was at a field day and we noticed that, they had been growing, it was north of I-80, and they had some annual ryegrass growing interplanted. Well, he had a large earthworm population, and the earthworm were grazing all the leaves on that. When it went dormant and laid down on the ground during the summer, then it became the forage, and it was pulled down. And in the root pit, I was finding it, 2 to 3 feet down into the ground where they'd grazed it off. So that was a issue that they had up there. But we just can't get the cereal rye to last and to go on in, And if we come in August and aerial seed or so, that would be it's very hit and miss, August or September, with our rainfall and keeping that something going interseeded later. So what we'll do with our cereal rye after the corn crop, we chase the combine with the air seeder, and we'll going right behind this, the cowpeas and the corn stalks there. Then we'll have our cereal rye growing in there, which I've dug down and I've found the cereal rye in the middle of wintertime have pierced a lot of the nodules. And so it's sucking up that nitrogen that those cowpeas have had. And what works really great is then it holds it up. And then I'm doing a big biomass of the cereal rye and planting soybeans into that. Well, then the release of nitrogen is when that's all dead, the cereal rye, it releases some of that nitrogen late in the season when soybeans love organic natural nitrogen, but they like it in July and August. So it makes a perfect fit for saving the nitrogen that I've grown and then transferring it to the next crop that can use it.
Chris, thanks today for sharing your insights on cover crop seeding, and I'd like to thank everyone out there in our virtual audience for joining us today. If you still have more questions about Chris's presentation or questions you'd like to ask him, go ahead and leave those in the comments section of this page, and we'll get an answer to you as soon as possible. And just a reminder, if you'd like to find out more about cover crop management, go to our new cover crop website that's launched, www.covercropstrategies.com.